Welcome to Outsmarting Antisemitism, Lesson 2, No Apologies. Last week, we discussed at length our emotional response to an anti-Semitic attack and how we make sure that, as always, our emotions are controlled by the Torah, by our own lives, by our own experiences, etc., and not that, heaven forbid, some terrorist somewhere on the other side of the globe is controlling how we feel about something. We spoke a lot about trust in God, etc. Today, we are going to talk about anti-Semitism from the other perspective. In other words, we're going to talk a little bit about why anti-Semitism exists today. Now, many of you may remember that I actually promised that we were not going to do that. We weren't going to talk about what makes anti-Semitism happen, and so therefore allow me to qualify. We are going to spend about 20 minutes proving 3 points. Okay, so we're not really going to explain why anti-Semitism exists. We are going to talk about anti-Semitism today and try to prove 3 points. Number one, that this hatred is an ancient hatred. Number two, that the claims made by anti-Semites have always been and always, well, I guess, and by extension, always will be absurd. They make no sense, and that these claims are often contradictory. Okay, now. We're going to do this primarily in order to get to one goal. We are very agenda-driven today. We are trying to drive home to ourselves on this group and those watching the recording and those coming tonight who are predominantly Jews, that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism is an anti-Semite problem. And at the end of the class, we're going to talk very, very passionately about why that's so important for us to fully appreciate and how that changes how we talk about anti-Semitism. It changes it completely. Okay? So that's the outline for today. So we're not just, for the sake of it, for the sake of just having research and talk about why anti-Semitism exists. That's not the point here today. We're very agenda-driven here today. Okay. So like I said, we're going to start off by trying to explain 3 things. Number one, anti-Semitism is an ancient hatred. It has been around as long as Jews have been around. Number two, anti-Semitism is an absurd hatred. It makes no sense. And therefore, it is very, very often contradictory to itself. In and of itself, it contradicts itself. Okay? And the first 2 texts that we are going to do, I'm going to ask you, if you don't have a pen, to go get one now. While we read the first 2 texts, text 1 and text 2, and I'll ask each of you to read a different one. Those that are not reading, and those that are, I'd like to ask you to take a pen or a highlighter and emphasize or underline anti-Semitic motifs that you see in text 1 and 2. You can do this on page 52. You can list them if you like. If you don't want to list them, you can just underline them in the texts. We've all heard many of the anti-Semitic motifs that there are out there. These are both texts that are as ancient as Jews themselves, as we'll see in just a moment. And you can see anti-Semitism is an ancient hatred. Okay, so let's start. Heidi, if you can, please, with text 1. Text 1 is from Tacitus. Tacitus was probably from the foremost ancient historians, great historians of the Roman Empire, and he recounts the story of the Roman. He's in the middle of recounting the story of the Roman conquest of Jerusalem, and while he does so, he breaks to discuss the history of the Jews. Okay, now he's going to talk a little bit about Egypt. So just a little bit of context here. He's basing on the writings of his predecessors, right? Because a lot of you are thinking, hey, Roman era, that's 1,000 years into the Jews, right? That's not ancient. At least, I mean, it's ancient to a certain degree, but it's not all the way ancient. He's actually basing on the writing of his predecessors. As far as we can tell, Tacitus is basing his version of history, which, by the way, today is very uncommon to find this. But suffice it to say that Americans today, in the media, everybody likes to spin the tale the way it was. You can see the same exact story. You watch Democratic news, you watch Republican news, and you see it from 2 different perspectives. This was the same case back in Egypt. Obviously, they didn't have modern media, etc. But there is a book, or writings, I should say, written by an Egyptian priest whose name is Manetho. I never heard of him before. In 270 BCE. Okay, so this is still way after the Exodus, but he published in Greek a history of Egypt. And in this account, which many people, by the way, say is the first anti-Semitic account that there ever was, he spins the tale of the Exodus from Egypt to his liking. And Tacitus is basing that account off of him. Either way, Heidi, if I can ask you to read for us, please, text 1. And everybody, if we can keep an eye, let's keep an eye out for, he's just rambling on about the history of the Jews. Let's try to keep an eye out for anti-Semitic motifs. How many of them can we find? Go ahead.
Okay. Ancient, observed, contradictory. Anti-Semitism has been called...
No. Text 1. Tacitus slanders the Jews.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Okay. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King Boccharis approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together, then being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping. One only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust themselves. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. They first choose to rest on the seventh day, but after a time, they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the seventh year as well to inactivity. The other customs of the Jews were base and abominable, and owe their persistence to their depravity. For the worst rascals among other peoples, renouncing their ancestral religions, always kept sending tribute and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion, but toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity.
Okay.
Wow.
We'll take answers afterwards. Okay, Heidi, now's a great chance for you to underline some of them. Joanne, can you continue for us, please? Text 2 is from Josephus. I assume everybody here has heard of Josephus. Josephus was a Jew who ended up joining the Romans and writing a lot of Jewish history. For the most part, the Hebrew version of his historical account is well accepted in Jewish circles. The Roman and Greek ones, I think it was written in Latin. The Latin version is a little bit. He deviates and he makes differences between the two of them. But either way, Josephus has a book which he calls Against Appian. Now, Appian was apparently, based on the works of Josephus, we see this, a very academic anti-Semite in his time. And Josephus is trying to answer some of the claims made about the Jews by Appian. Now, Appian's texts did not survive, but since we have Against Appian, right? So we can try to figure out from that. We can try to surmise from that what it was that Appian was claiming. And again, you'll see very common anti-Semitic motifs listed here. If you find one, please underline it, because I'm going to ask. We'll talk about this all after we read text here. Joanne, when you're ready.
Appian slanders Jews. They tell lies and invent absurd calumnies about our temple without showing any consciousness of impiety. Yet to high-minded men, nothing is more disgraceful than a lie of any description, but above all on the subject of a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity. Within this sanctuary, Appian has the effrontery to assert that the Jews kept an ass's head, worshiping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintains, on the occasion of the spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes, when the head, made of gold and worth a high price, was discovered. Now, how did it escape him that the facts convict him of telling an incredible lie? He adds a second story of Greek origin, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end. In their anxiety to defend Antiochus, they have further invented, to discredit us, the fictitious story which follows. Appian, who is there the spokesman of others, asserts that, Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. He said that he was a Greek and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then lead him to a certain wood, where they slew him and sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, and while immolating the Greek, swore an oath of enmity to the Greeks. The remains of their victim were then thrown into a pit. The man stated that he had now but a few days left to live and implored the king, out of respect for the gods of Greece, to defeat this Jewish plot upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament.
Keep reading. 2 more lines.
Oh, there's more?
It's a little.
Oh, fools must be refuted, not by arguments, but by facts. Here then, we have rank impiety at its worst and a gratuitous lie designed to mislead persons who do not trouble to investigate the facts.
Thank you, Joanne. So, of course, Josephus in his book Against Appian, which we were just quoting, goes on to discredit these facts and to provide the proper facts. Great, beautiful. But for the purposes of our conversation, here we see some very, very ancient sources to perhaps some anti-Semitic tropes, which we've heard very recently, right? So on page 52, what do you guys have? Let's see what everybody has. Elise, what do you have so far? Elise, we can't hear you. You're muted. I don't know if she stepped away from the computer.
I'm sorry, I can't read. I didn't bring my book with
That's
me.
okay. That's okay not to read. But from the 2 texts that we just read, did you recognize any common anti-Semitic motifs? That's okay.
No, okay. No.
That's okay. Heidi, what do you think? Heidi? Sorry, unmute.
Okay, got it. In the first one, the Jews are being blamed for social troubles. So they're being scapegoated.
Beautiful. That's something we've seen over and over again throughout the years, right?
Right.
I think it was in Der Stürmer. Which one was it? One of the big German newspapers, the Nazi Party newspapers, would often say the Jews are our misfortune, right? That was like one of the lines that they had across the top of the newspaper all the time. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, me?
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, they're sneaky. They're referred to as the worst rascals among other peoples.
Right.
They reject the Roman gods, so therefore they can't be trusted.
Right.
And they're lazy.
Lazy. That's a big one, right? That's another big anti-Semitic. Joanne, you got anything for us? What do you think?
Well, the human sacrifice, worship of an animal, and I think, well, there was something about this that reminded me of something very current.
Well, for starters, blood libels, no?
Yeah. No, it was the implication that I'm better than everybody else. I can't remember what the words were in here.
You said somewhere there, right? Yeah, he definitely discussed that they care for their own kind, but they don't care for anyone else, right?
Well, yes, that. It doesn't mention the issue of the chosen people here, but we can talk about that later.
They're getting richer. They're sending the money to Jerusalem.
Yeah,
so
right, exactly. Yes, Jews care about money. Okay, so let's summarize here for a second. Some of the ones we see just in these 2 texts alone, which are ancient beyond, right? Number 1, the source of all society's problems, right? So, for instance, you talk about Egypt, right? Tacitus, which is what Heidi read, talks about how in Egypt they blamed the plague on the Jewish people. That goes all the way till today. If you go on social media today, after this class, and you Google Jews COVID-19, there are a lot of conspiracy theories up there that the Jews are the ones who caused it. right? And this ties all the way down to stuff we see in the media about like the Orthodox Jews in Williamsburg because they had a funeral and all sorts of things like that. That's all their fault. Lazy, someone mentioned that already. The Jews are idle and lazy, and they're parasites, and they live off everybody else's work. Joanne mentioned rejected by the gods. The Jews have been rejected by the gods, therefore we should reject them. Moving along, the Jews have different values than us. They have opposing values that are different than ours. And as a result, in other words, because they have values that are very different from all of our values, therefore they don't belong in our society. Let's keep going though. That the Jews are more wealthy than the rest of society, and possibly one of the reasons for this is because they rip off the non-Jews, right? They're constantly swindling everyone. By the way, that's one that just recently when we had, I'm probably going to mention him a few times during today's class. That's worth it for me to give a little introduction. I want to say 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, we had a fellow by the name of Frank Mink who spoke here at Chabad of Pasadena. Does anybody remember him? Not a Jewish fellow. And he had formerly been part of a neo-Nazi group.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
If you were there that evening, you'll remember that some of the things that he remembers hearing as a young child that influenced him were the term, he Jewed me, as synonymous or slang for he ripped me off, right? And I'm probably going to reference him later. He had a very powerful
they say that all the
how
time.
he turned around. Come again?
I hear that all the time. A guy told me somebody's going to Jew somebody down, the mechanic. Absolutely. So I told him, well, I'm Jewish. Maybe you shouldn't say that.
Very often people don't even know necessarily that one. Anyway, and the last one here.
I heard a Jewish woman actually say that.
Right. And the last one, of course, is the cruel rituals, whether that's the one with the Roman that they were fattening up only to slaughter him. That rings true just, in today's day and age, it's not as common, but certainly 100 years ago with the blood libels in Eastern Europe, that was certainly a big deal. So far, we have proven that as far back as anti-Semitism goes, it is ancient. It is ancient. It is beyond many of the hatreds that we know of that exist in today's day and age. And we'll talk about why that's so important shortly. Shayna, do you have a book yet?
Yes.
Oh, amazing. I'm so happy it came. Okay.
It arrived today.
Oh, wow. Perfect timing. Okay. So then we'll ask you, and this is all the way to Montreal. Okay. So then if we can ask you, please, to read text 3. Again, remember, we're trying to prove 3 points. That anti-Semitism is and always was an ancient hatred, that it's always been an absurd hatred, and that it is often contradictory. So let's see how it's absurd. Text 3, absurd in our day. Go ahead.
Conspiracy theories are rarely logical. It is not surprising then that even as Al-Qaeda took credit for the September 11th attacks, the group did nothing to stop rumor claiming that the Jews were really responsible. The rumor alleged that Israel, specifically Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, was behind the plot and had warned Jews not to go to work at the World Trade Center on the day of the attacks. On September 18th, an editor from a website known as the Information Times posted a message claiming that the terrorist government of Israel cannot be ruled out as a suspect. The editor did not identify a motive or provide evidence in support of his allegation. In his words, he was simply raising a, quote, reasonable question. 5 days later, Al-Manar, a TV station based in Lebanon, stated that Mossad had indeed warned 4,000 Jews who worked at the World Trade Center to stay home on September 11th. Within days, that rumor appeared in newspapers and electronic mailing lists around the world. People continued to believe the lie despite the fact that about 18% of the known dead were identified in obituaries as Jews.
So this is some pretty crazy stuff. Talk about conspiracy theories. This is as absurd as they get to say that the Jews are the ones who did 9/11, and yet it didn't stop it from spreading. Okay, so far, anti-Semitism is ancient and it is absurd, but it is also extremely contradictory. Instead of reading text 4, which is from Rabbi Menachem Zemba, we have a beautiful video which actually tells us a little bit about who he was. He was the rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, which we'll learn in just a moment. And then it's going to go through the actual text. So if you want, at that point, you can follow on the screen, or you can follow in text 4. Please turn your attention to the video screen.
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of antisemitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zemba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the 5th day of Passover, April 24, 1943, Rabbi Zemba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
I think that Rabbi Zemba really beautifully summarizes just how absurd anti-Semitism is. Because when something can contradict itself generation after generation after generation, oh, you're the capitalists, oh, you're the socialists, oh, you're the, then you're just looking for, you're clearly just looking for excuses to hate us. So now, by the way, I should mention, not that I think it's that necessary for this crowd, but just in case, I should mention that in general, anti-Semitic tropes have always fallen into three categories. Sometimes, to two categories. Sometimes they were complete falsehoods, and sometimes they were things that maybe were based on a shred of truth, but then exaggerated beyond. So, for instance, take for example the claim that the Jews were behind communism. Right? Were there many Jews who were communists? Sure. The absurdity, though, and the falsehood of the anti-Semitic claim lies in what they did with that claim, right? So they would exaggerate on both ends, exaggerate how many Jews were communists and how many communists were Jews, thereby being able to blame the entire Communist Party on the Jewish people. And much more importantly, they used this anti-Semitic trope in order to justify abhorrent crimes such as murder, etc. Right? So we're not going to talk about any specific ones here. The general idea is to talk about how absurd they all are, and to talk about how absurd anti-Semitism is as a whole. And the purpose of that, how ancient it is and how absurd it is. And that's why how contradictory it is. But all of this leads us to 2 points. Okay, number one, and this is such a powerful point, and unfortunately, so many people don't understand this. Number one is we will never explain away anti-Semitism. We will never be able to take an anti-Semite who hates Jews because of this trope or this reason or that reason and tell him, oh, but it's not true, oh, but this, oh, but that. Besides for the fact, by the way, that Against Appian actually proves that, because that's a piece written by a Jew 2,000 years ago, right? Who's probably trying for the first time to say, all right, this guy has, or he's trying to propagate misinformed information about the Jews. Let me just prove him wrong with the facts, right? That's what Josephus says he's going to do. And clearly, 2,000 years later, people are still believing those same very facts. Okay, I think in today's day and age with fake news takes it to a whole new level. We are very well aware that explaining the facts to people don't necessarily convince them that their opinion is wrong. This is actually what the Bar Lipstadt, who we quoted quite a bit last week, shares with us in text 5. Ron, can you please read for us? Don't forget to unmute yourself. Page 56, text 5.
Okay. Upon reading anti-Semitic slanders and lies, we may be tempted to consider it sufficient to simply broadcast the correct information. While this type of effort is beneficial, it is not enough to solve the problem, because some haters simply refuse to allow themselves to be confused with facts. A second point that is clarified by the sheer absurdity of anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is a misnomer, a more accurate term used by Jews in prior generations is evil or wickedness.
Where did you jump to?
I'm reading the dealing with absurdity, the very beginning of text 5.
Okay, sorry about that. I want you to read text 5. If you can read.
It is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, delusional, and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is just one. Think about it. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set someplace in the American West? Despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary, they believe that because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies. to fool the public. If we were to provide these conspiracy theorists with evidence that proves the landing was indeed on the moon, they would be a priori dismiss what we say and assume we are part of the conspiracy. To try to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents with a rational explanation, is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge.
Thank you, Ron. So point number one that all of this leads us to, in other words, viewing anti-Semitism through history and appreciating how ancient it is and how absurd it is and how contradictory it is, it leads us to appreciate that explanations to people will not help. And thank God in today's day, I mean, not thank God, I mean, it's a sorry state of affairs that the world is in today, but thank God today we have so many examples of that, right? The moon landing that he gave was only one of them. Any, Trump insurrectionists or whatever it is, right? Anybody who believes in any sort of conspiracy theory, essentially it's impossible to prove them wrong. And it's never going to work to attempt to confuse them with the facts, right? Why? Because the moment you try to, you're just in on the conspiracy theory. So if any one of us, for instance, were to attempt to stand on a stage, and this was attempted, by the way, by many Jewish rabbis thousands of years ago, and have a debate about why Jews are not, they don't sacrifice Christian children for their matzah, whatever, right? And slaughter them to use their blood for the matzah. Can everyone hear me, by the way, or did I freeze?
No, you're okay.
Okay, good, just making sure. Or if anyone were to attempt to disprove any of these things, immediately they would just say, oh, you're Jewish, of course you're going to disprove that, right? Or it's just a conspiracy theory, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the point that's being made. That's number one. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to refute false claims. Every once in a while we should do it, but that's not our modus operandi when it comes to anti-Semitism. And number two is, all this reminds us that we should never, ever dignify it. And unfortunately, the very word anti-Semitism, which we're going to continue to use throughout this class because we don't really have that much of a choice, but the very word anti-Semitism tries to do it a little bit of dignity, so to speak. Heidi, if you can read for us, please, text 6.
What's in a name? Mar Wilhelm, German writer, political theorist, and agitator. In 1879, Mar founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Mar coined the term anti-Semitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, polite.
And that was his purpose. That was his goal. It was his stated goal. That's why he did that, right? And think about other things that you know of as anti, right? Oh, I'm anti-communist. I'm anti-this. I'm anti-monarchist, anti-separatist, anti-nationalist. You know, all these different terms that we use. The attempt here is to just stick anti-Semitism as part of that. Oh, I'm an anti-Semite. I'm against this particular movement of people which are Semitic. Never mind the fact they were born that way. Never mind the fact that they're just right. That you don't disagree with them. You just hate them for whatever reason. There's another issue here where anti-Semitism seems to pretend as if it's anti-all Semites, and yet there isn't any other of any other Semitic nation besides for Jews. But leaving that aside, and that's why text 7 encourages us to call it what it is. And by the way, this is so old. Okay, this is from the second half of the 17th century. This woman, Gluckel of Hamelin, she was a Jewish businesswoman in Germany during the second half of the 17th century. And she authored a memoir that we have till today, which is pretty cool. And she recounts the story that occurred in 1687. And in short, a non-Jewish resident of Hamburg was sentenced to death because he had murdered 2 innocent Jewish men. And this was too much for the anti-Semites of Hamburg, and they couldn't allow somebody to just lose their life over doing nothing, right? Murdering Jews, what kind of crime is that? And it inspired intense anti-Semitic agitation among the masses. But notice that the word anti-Semitism, which we just read about it in text 6, which only originates from Mar Wilhelm in the 1800s, is glaringly missing from her description. Joanne, can you read for us, please? Text 7. Call it what it is.
On the day the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for 100 years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were in danger due to the extreme rishush, evil wickedness that had been aroused. You know, I have that book,
Luckle of Hamlin's?
Yeah, I have it in another room. I have to look that up. I read it, but I don't remember that.
I have never read it, but take a look. The word anti-Semitism doesn't exist. And when searching around on her own as a Jew for a word to describe it, the word is rishus, like from the root word rasha. It's not anti-Semitism, it's evil. It's wickedness. It's a destructive force. It's hatred, right? Which is why today there's a movement, there's like a small social media movement of people that don't like the word anti-Semitism, and instead they try to call it Jew hatred, etc. And either they will or they won't be successful, and maybe that word will disappear from our lexicon. Okay, so all of this leads us to one question. That is, why the Jews? Okay, if we cannot give any of these reasons, and we can't give legitimacy to any of these reasons, right? And we've learned that any of those reasons are usually just excuses. Even the very fact that we're accused of both opposites is clearly showing that. So if so then what is the inspiration behind anti-Semitism? Okay, what might or as we ask on page 59, what might explain the persistence of anti-Semitism? So as usual, Rabbi Sachs, and we're going to dig into some of the sources behind what he's going to share here, but he summarizes it beautifully. Shana, are you there with us? I think not. I think she stepped away from the computer. So Ron, if you can please read for us text 8, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, who just passed away about a year ago. Ron?
Okay, I got you. There's been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat.
So hold on. I just want to point out he's clearly not going with reasons that anti-Semites say they hate the Jews, right? We've ruled all that out. He's trying to figure out, where does it really come from, right? So he says, some have seen it in psychological terms. Okay, go ahead.
Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus, who seek to kill those who gave us birth. I don't know about that.
Okay, go ahead.
It would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon didn't give rise to multiple explanations.
Okay, so Jonathan Sachs is not necessarily giving us an actual explanation. He's just saying that take a look at how many explanations exist out there, and that's a symptom of the fact that this is such an inexplicable and strange hatred that exists out here. Okay? Question. Of all the explanations that were presented in text 8, do any of them resonate with you? Anybody?
No. And I'll tell you why.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, from my exposure to some Christians, their thought is that it stems from the fact that they accept the Torah as the the chief book, okay? And in that book, that connects them to God. And in that book, it states that Jews were the chosen people by God. And from that, they feel because they've been the chosen people and have separated themselves from society and their norms, that there is resentment to that.
Okay. But I'm asking if any of these particular reasons resonate with you. You're giving why one of them doesn't, but there were a lot of other reasons given.
Right.
Right. There were psychological reasons given. Right.
I would say that it'd be psychological.
Shana, what did you want to contribute? Go ahead.
I think that in Christianity and in Islam too, there's a sense that both of those religions replaced Judaism as the true religion. I
think that's his point with the myth of Oedipus.
Oedipus.
Oedipus, sorry.
And
I never heard of this myth before.
You never heard of Oedipus?
No.
Oedipus is a Greek mythology.
No, I picked as much up and I went and looked it up afterwards.
He was in love with his mother.
No, I understand. And whatever. I mean, look, you don't come to me to hear about Oedipus. You come to me to hear about the Jewish perspective on things. I think that the reason why so many of these things don't resonate with us is because they all seem to be tacking on a reason after the fact. And I think that we would do well to remember what we should always do if something is ancient, absurd, extremely disturbing, very puzzling, doesn't seem to have any sort of answer. Where can we turn to that does have an answer? To the Torah. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do with you in the 50 minutes or 40 minutes that we have left.
Okay.
We mentioned in last week's lesson that we are going to often turn to the story of Esther and the Purim story for explanations. And here we're going to quote a section from the Talmud. And the explanation I'm going to give you today, which obviously is only one, is the explanation of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And what's particularly important, I think, about this explanation is that it helps us to gain a better idea of what to do and what not to do in our quest to outsmart and defeat anti-Semitism. What I mean by that is as follows. Instead of just trying to explain anti-Semitism as a cultural or a research phenomena and a scientific phenomena, instead, it's going to take a direct approach as to what can we do to change the way people see us. Okay, it's going to try to address it from that perspective. So in the third chapter of the book of Esther, which we read every year on Purim, we learn of the plan contrived by Haman, the wicked minister to or advisor to King Ahasuerus. The book of Esther describes how Haman goes about telling Ahasuerus that there's this nation that lives among you, and Datehem shonot mikol am, their ways are different than all of the people. They're scattered and they're separate among the peoples throughout the provinces of your kingdom. And he offers to destroy them for Ahasuerus. And he offers to give the king 10,000 silver cubes, which was the calculation at that time of how much in taxes, the amount would be in taxes that the king would lose by destroying the Jews, by getting rid of the Jews. And the king says, you're doing me a favor. He says, Hakesef nasun lach. You keep the silver. V'ha'am lasot bo katov beinach. And the nation, you could do with them as you see fit in your eyes. In other words, Ahasuerus was no deep lover of the Jews. So here we have two anti-Semites having a conversation about destroying the Jews. And the Talmud points out something very fascinating about this conversation. Right? So again, in front of us we have Haman wants to destroy the Jews. The king doesn't need much convincing. Two anti-Semites discussing the destruction of the Jewish people. And the Talmud has some very powerful insight about this. And in classic Talmudic fashion, by the way, I will point out, I've never seen it applied to this section, but I will point out that very often when the Talmud uses this classical rhetoric, which is to use an analogy in order to describe something, very often what the Talmud is doing is avoiding censorship by non-Jews throughout the generations. But let's see the analogy that we have here. I think Shana, go ahead, text 9, page 61. Anti-Semites in parable.
We can use a parable to gain insight into the respective positions of Ahasuerus and Haman. They are similar to two individuals, one of whom has a tall mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused to himself, I wish I could buy the tall mound to fill up my ditch. The owner of the mound said to himself, I wish I could purchase the right to dump my mound into his empty ditch.
Okay. Hold on, there's 3 more lines.
Not long afterward, the two met. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound said, take it for free. You'll do me a favor.
And this is the Talmud's parable for a Haman and Achashverosh. Haman wants to destroy the Jews. The king doesn't need much convincing, right? Haman is the one who has a mound that he wants gone. The king who has a void that he wants filled. And the king has a mound that he wants gone from his kingdom. So they make a deal. Beautiful. Couple questions. Number one, whenever the Talmud cites analogies, it's usually to deepen our understanding of a very complex idea. What exactly is it that wasn't understood about the fact that 2 anti-Semites are conspiring to kill the Jews that needed more explanation? Right? In other words, what deeper insight is gained from this analogy? And number two, hold on a second. Haman has a ditch that he's trying to fill. I get Achashverosh. He has a mound he's trying to get rid of. There's a nation that he doesn't want among his kingdom. Excuse me. But Haman has a ditch that he's trying to fill. Haman was trying to annihilate a people. He also had a mound. 2 people, they both had mounds. They were trying to get rid of them. It was a thorn in their side. They're trying to get rid of it. So the Rebbe explains that the Talmud is actually teaching us that there are 2 different types of anti-Semites. And there are 2 different dimensions to anti-Semitism in general that we will find throughout history. The first dimension of anti-Semitism is a superficial form of anti-Semitism. It is the Achashverosh form of anti-Semitism, or as we will call it, the mound form of anti-Semitism. This is someone who sees Jews as different than everyone else around them. This is someone who doesn't like the way the Jews act. He says, you are different and I despise you and I want you gone. Just as a field owner wants a pile of dirt removed from his field, right? If this were the sum total of anti-Semitism, by the way, it would be very depressing, because it would leave us no other choice other than to be hated, right? But it would also, at its core, show how ridiculous it is. You just don't like someone for who they are. I mean, today in America, that would never fly. Someone's different than you, and that's why you want to destroy them. But here comes the second half of the analogy. Haman's ditch. Haman was a much deeper version of an anti-Semite. Haman, it turns out, the Talmud is calling him out, not just for being a foolish king like Achashverosh, who just wants to get rid of somebody because they're different than him, superficial at best. Haman was much deeper. Haman, the Talmud is describing to us, has a void. And the only way to fill that void is by getting rid of the Jew. Interesting. What is this void? Let's take a look. Who was Haman? Haman, at the point that he makes this decree against the Jewish people, is probably the most successful people, physically speaking, in the entire kingdom of Achashverosh, which, by the way, was a world empire. Right? Let's read text 10. Where are we holding here? Ron just read for us. Joanne, can you read for us, please? Text 10, page 63.
Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials and royal courtiers. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her, along with the king. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the palace gate.
The Rebbe explains Haman had reached the epitome of what the physical and material world can offer. He was second in command to the king. He was being invited to private parties together with the queen. Everyone that he would meet him in the street would bow down to him. What is wrong with you? Why can't you go ahead and live your life? Why do you have to hate someone else and destroy someone else? Why is it that while he's on the way to the party, what happens? He deviates on the way to the party. He says, let me just go take care of one thing. Why? Because every time I see Mordechai the Jew, and by the way, note that it was Mordechai himself that was causing him ire, but it was also the fact that Mordechai was Jewish. As we know, it resulted in him wanting to destroy the entire Jewish people. This was something that was a big, big problem for Haman. You see, Haman had reached the epitome of the material pursuits of this world, and yet he still felt empty inside. There was a void. There was a ditch. And he couldn't figure it out. He felt meaningless. He felt purposeless. He had everything else in life, and yet somehow this Jew, who doesn't have anywhere near as much as him, seems to live his life with purpose. Everybody else is bowing down to him, but this one Jew won't bow down to him. Clearly, he stands for something that it's worth falling for. And this Haman couldn't stand. This made him jealous to no end. This void inside of him, and now we understand why the Talmud calls it a ditch, made Haman look at a Jew and say, what are you doing here? Who are you? And who gives you the right to call me this? Who gives you the right to make me feel like lesser than you when I've been so successful with my life? I managed to accomplish everything. And I should have to look at a lowly Jew and feel guilty, feel like my life doesn't have purpose? I have everything. This is the difference of a Jew in general, not just in times of Purim, but throughout history, that makes an anti-Semite uncomfortable. A true anti-Semite, the deeper psyche behind an anti-Semite is someone who is deeply uncomfortable with who he is. This also begins to explain to us why not all non-Jews are anti-Semites, right? Many non-Jews fill their lives with meaning, and they don't feel the need to look at a Jew and say, "Oh, you make me feel uncomfortable." The Torah teaches us that Hashem created a human being in order to serve God with a purpose. It changes human beings from being not needy beings, needing everything from God, wanting to take, but as purposeful beings, that God created us to give to the rest of the world. And when Haman saw a Jew, he was reminded of the fact that he was not fulfilling any sort of such purpose in the world. We're choosing to view this through the story of Esther, but actually just to give a little bit more, I don't want to get exhaustive here with sources, but to give three more sources for this, without reading them inside, there's a medrash called the Medrash Lekach Tov, which is actually brought down, the Talmud itself quotes this as well. It says, Lama Nikra Shema Sinai. Why was Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, called Sinai? It was actually called Horeb. Many of you might be familiar with, right? Mount Horeb. Why was it called Sinai? So the Talmud says because at Sinai, hatred of the Jewish people entered the world. Because the moment that the Jewish people were told you have a purpose, and this is the Torah that's going to show you that purpose, that is what caused the rest of the world or others in the world to hate us. I quote to you from Shir HaShirim, from Song of Songs by King Solomon, right? In the Medrash Rabbah on Shir HaShirim, it says, the Jews say before God, Master of the world, all the illnesses that the nations cause me to suffer come about because of my love for you. It is that relationship with God, which we at times have, at times don't, but certainly when a non-Jew looks at us, he often sees it and says, that's something that I want to have. And they could have it. But instead of translating it into a desire to do better and to lead a purposeful life, instead they translate it to let me just get rid of the person who's making me feel that way. I'll quote one more source and then I'll apply it to some other famous anti-Semites that you're familiar with. In Bamidbar Rabbah, in Medrash Rabbah on Bamidbar, it says, Moshe said, Master of the world, had we been Gentiles, idol worshippers, or deniers of the mitzvahs, they would neither hate us nor persecute us. It is only on account of the Torah and mitzvahs that you gave us that they hate us. There is a book called Hitler Speaks. It's a series of political conversations with Adolf Hitler on his real aims, which is written by a man whose name is Hermann Rushing. And there's a pretty famous quote here that he ascribes to Hitler in which he says, and many of you have probably heard this before, conscience, that one of the biggest sins that the Jewish people brought to the world was conscience. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish, like circumcision. And this was part of Hitler's reasoning for why Jews needed to be destroyed from the world. And so this is a consistent theme that we see, that someone sees someone else leading a more purposeful life than them. It's in general, it's jealousy in general. When someone sees someone else that has a better life than them, instead of it inspiring them to be better people. Instead, they choose to channel it into hatred for that person. Now, Haman could have chosen to fill the void in a positive way. He could have chosen to look at Mordechai and say, wow, look at this man. He stands for something. Let me go see what this wisdom is all about. Let me go see what the Torah is all about. But instead, he chose to channel it into hatred. Now, this has been one explanation of anti-Semitism. And I think there's a slide to summarize it. So to make sure that we don't fall behind, let's go through it. Right? So Achashverosh is typical, racism, xenophobia, no explanation necessary. You're different than me, I hate you. Haman is trying to eliminate an inner void that he has. Right? As Haman says, I can have everything in the world, but every time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the palace gate, I feel empty. Now, this has been one explanation of the Rebbe for anti-Semitism. But I think much more important than this explanation per se is the orientation that this explanation takes. Unfortunately, there is an unfortunate phenomenon, and here I'm talking directly to the Jews listening to this message. There is an unfortunate phenomenon among Jews that every once in a while you meet someone that takes the hatred that there is out there, the anti-Semitism that there is out there, and they internalize it. This can be very, very damaging psychologically. What does it mean to internalize the anti-Semitism, to internalize the hatred? It means that we start looking within ourselves for what we need to change about ourselves and who we are in order to do this. Now, on a very basic level, we'll give examples of this in just a moment, but just by way of analogy, if you take a look at stopbullying.gov, which is the website, the official website about bullies and the psyche behind bullies, etc., right? When a child is bullied on the playground, it's extremely important for educators to realize that to blame the bully, which unfortunately many warped educators in generations past did, to say you're asking for it is completely wrong. In other words, is only further psychologically damaging to the child being bullied. Why? Because bullying is never, even if the child is asking for it, and even if there are things that that child can work on, bullying is always the fault of the bully, which means to say as follows. It's not about the strongness or the macho-ness that the bully is displaying. It's much more about the psychological emptiness that the bully feels the need to cover over. We're all familiar with this intuitively. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, unfortunately, not all Jews take that approach. And instead, we say to ourselves, maybe it's something about us. Maybe we need to change. And that's what I think is most powerful about this perspective. It's not so much the explanation per se, it's more importantly, the underlying orientation that the explanation takes, which is, let's stop looking at ourselves for explanations of anti-Semitism and instead look at what the problem is in the other person. And we'll soon see how that has a great impact on the way we approach it. But for now, let's read from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs again, text 11. Heidi, please.
Oh, okay, page sorry. What page are we on?
Page 64, text 11.
Oh, great. Sorry, I had to step away. Against internalization. Jews must fight anti-Semitism, but never internalize it. That is easier said than done. If you are hated, it is natural to believe you are hateful, that the defect lies in you. It rarely does. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not in the person of the hated. Jews have faults, and Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. But those faults have nothing to do with those of which they are accused by their enemies. Anti-Semitism tells us about anti-Semites, not Jews. One of the mistakes made by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they should try as far as possible not to be different. So some converted, others assimilated, yet others reformulated Judaism to eliminate as far as possible all that made Jews and Judaism distinctive. When these things failed, as they did, not only in 19th century Germany and Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized this failure. Thus was born the tortured psychology known as Jewish self-hatred.
Thank you, Heidi. Now, some extreme versions of this is when Jews said, oh, you know what the solution to anti-Semitism is? Let's assimilate among the non-Jews. let's become exactly like them. Then they won't hate us anymore. And we know how that worked out, as he just said, from 14th century Spain, from 19th century Germany and Austria, etc. Let's let go of our traditions. Let's take the kippah off our head. Let's take the Star of David off our neck. Let's take the mezuzah off my door. This will somehow I won't be in their face. So therefore they won't hate me anymore. It may help temporarily because they don't see you as often, but it doesn't take away the problem. It isn't curing the problem. And this is a grave error to make. And it's gone as extreme as, renouncing beliefs. Jews saying, I no longer believe in Judaism, etc. Intermarriage, etc. All these sorts of things. These attempts, historically, for starters, were unsuccessful at curing anti-Semitism or avoiding anti-Semitism, etc. But beyond them being unsuccessful, their orientation is wrong. It's you choosing to turn inwards and look at yourself when really it has nothing to do with you. It has much more to do with anti-Semitism. Now, big qualifying factor here. This is not to say that Jews do not need to become better. We all do. We all need to become better people. We should always be looking inward and analyzing ourselves, becoming better people and more moral people, etc. But not because of anti-Semitism. Because of a drive to be better, to be more moral, to be more connected to God. When it's stimulated by anti-Semitism, then it is a twisted, torturous psychological malady. Explanations of anti-Semitism must be turned outward. Because hate exists in the mind of the hater and not the person of the hated. By the way, just to tie this lesson to last week's lesson, another big issue that people make when they do that is that when you start to let go, not only of things that you think are causing the hatred, so your mezuzah, your kippah, whatever it is, right? Not only are you letting go, are you not curing the issue, but you're actually letting go of some of the things that are protecting you most, as we discussed, right? That the mezuzah is actually the source of our protection, etc. Believing in Hashem is the source of our protection, connecting to the Torah mitzvahs. The more we connect, the safer we are, etc., etc. But that's a little off topic. It's just to connect it to last week. And that's why it's so important that we shouldn't be looking to reduce our distinctiveness and our noticeability. This notion that if Jews are less out in the open, we stoke anti-Semitism is totally wrong. Let's take a look at text 12. It's an ironic story. Ron, if you can, please. Ron, you're muted. Yeah, there you go.
I was once traveling on a bus, dressed in my customary garb, wearing a broad black hat and a black frock coat. A man approached me and said, "I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. There is no need for Jews in America to be so conspicuous with long beards and black hats." "I'm sorry, mister," I said to the man, "I'm not Jewish. I'm Amish, and this is how we dress." The man became apologetic. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir," he said. "I did not mean to offend you. I think you should be proud of preserving your traditions."
Wow.
Why is it that Jews will tell everyone else to be open about their traditions and open about their identities, etc. And everyone should be proud of their identity. But when it comes to us ourselves, we have a hard time doing that. Why is that? Let me ask you a question. Do Jews belong in America, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in Switzerland, wherever it is? If Jews belong here, then we should be able to be proud Jews. We shouldn't need to hide our identity in order to be here. That is essentially what that perspective is saying. Yeah, Jews belong here, but only if they're the same as everyone else. So when we take a stance where we show our Judaism with pride, and I know this is the Chabad mantra, and many of you are looking at me like, "Oh yeah, of course that's Chabad. Put menorahs up in front of City Hall, etc." Right? But think about the logic here. What is the message? The message is saying, not only will I not hide my Judaism, but I will be as open as possible with my Judaism. If you have a problem with me being here, that's your problem, not mine. Jews belong in America, and Jews belong in the world as Jews. We don't need to change in order to belong in the world. Now, in addition to the fact that it confirms we belong here, it also is a very, very powerful statement about other minorities, right? What what are we saying about the African American community or about the Asian community? When we take our Star of David and we say, I'll wear it, but I'll wear it under my this. I'll wear my tzitzis, but it'll be under my pants. I'll tuck it into my pants. Or I'll take my kippah off when I'm walking in the street. Forget what we're saying about Judaism here for a moment. Forget the spiritual protection that you're letting go of. Forget the identity that you're hiding, etc. What is the message you're sending to an African American walking down the street?
That you'll blend in.
But
when you do hide the symbols of your religion, that you will blend in.
That you don't belong here unless you can blend in.
Right.
I will share with you words that I saw recently posted on Facebook by my friend Rabbi Berkowitz. I think he's a rabbi in Huntington Beach. And this is such a powerful story. He was walking in Moscow years and years ago, right after the fall of communist Russia, so in the 1990s, right after the fall of the former Soviet Union. And it's such a powerful story. He was walking with another Jew, who I think was a local Jew, and he had come to visit. And the Jew told, I forget the exact details, I wasn't planning to share the story, but I will certainly look it up so that I can share it properly tonight. And he was saying, the guy was telling him, I guess there were some Russians, some non-Jews that were eyeing them very, whatever. He was walking with a kippah and tzitzis and a black hat and a jacket and a beard and the works. And there were some people eyeing them like, very, some shady characters eyeing them. And so this other Jew asked, he said, do me a favor, can you just take your kippah off and put it in your pocket? Rabbi Berkowitz wasn't sure what to respond. And he says, just at that moment, there was a group of, I want to say black, but maybe it was some other minority. Black, it definitely was skin color, whatever it was. So let's say black folks walking towards them. And he says, all in one instant, I had the answer to the other Jew. He said, when that fellow can change the color of his skin in order to be able to walk down the street, then I will take my kippah and I will put it in my pocket in order to be able to walk down the street. In other words, the message that we send when we take our kippah off is that this is something additional to our identity. It's like optional, and we're happy to take it off in order to make other people feel happy. But it's not. Maybe the kippah is additional and something we can take off, but our Judaism is who we are. So just as someone who's black can't change the color of their skin in order to be able to fit your agenda and be allowed to walk down the streets here in America, neither can a Jew. So an open identity is important, first of all, because it confirms that we actually belong here. We don't belong here only on your terms. And it sends that same message about every other minority. And thirdly, it continues a historic role that Jewish people have played. And what do I mean by that? You know what? I'm going to let the text speak for themselves because I've been jumping ahead here a little bit. Let's read text 13. Joanne, if you can, please. This is from Barry Weiss again, the columnist from the New York Times. Go ahead.
In the first 3 decades of my life, I never wore a Magan David necklace. It always seemed redundant to me. But since the Pittsburgh attack, I have worn a Jewish star pendant regularly, especially in public venues and in situations where I am conscious of being one of the only Jews in the room. The show of pride has become important to me. I want people to know that I am unafraid. This is the example set by Mitchell Leshner during his middle school graduation this spring in Vernon Hills, Illinois. Because Leshner doesn't usually wear a kippah, but the Poway shooting changed things for the 14-year-old. It is important to make a statement that we're still here and that no matter what happens, we'll still be here.
Thank you, Joanne. So again, we're lagging behind here a little bit, right? So that's number one. Number one, it confirms that we belong here. Number two, it benefits other minorities. And this is nowhere said better than by Cecil Roth, who's a historian. And he points out that actually, historically, Jews have been at the forefront of playing that role. Shana, can you read for us, please? Text 14.
Yes, a symbol against uniformity. In this fact, perhaps, lay the greatest service of the medieval Jew to mankind. It was a period when authority was triumphant in the intellectual sphere, when thought was circumscribed even more than practice, when uniformity had established itself, not as an accident, but as a principle, throughout European life. Had this state of affairs continued unchallenged, progress, scientific as well as philosophical, would have been impossible. The mere fact that the Jew existed and that he preserved the habit of independent thought helped to save the world from this menace. It was impossible, even for the least original mind, to fail to realize that in the Jewish quarter there existed a class as intelligent at least as other men were, who yet did not believe in other men, who did not believe as other men, who possessed literature and beliefs and practices which were not like those of the rest of the world, and who refused to pay even lip service to the prevailing ideas. This very fact saved the world from accepting uniformity finally as a natural thing. It stimulated students and thinkers to realize the existence of other spheres to conquer over and above those which were delineated from the pulpit. And if from time to time Europe shook off its lethargy and began to re-examine it for itself, the wells of human thought, the propinquity of the Jew was in part responsible.
Thank you, Shana. This is a role that the Jewish people have filled since Abraham himself, since our forefather Abraham, when he rode against the tide. Abraham was called Abraham HaIvri. Jews being called Ivri goes all the way back to Abraham. And Ivri comes from the word Aver, which means that he was on the other side. As the commentary explained, that Abraham was on one side of the world and everyone else was on the other side. This idea that we don't need to be like everyone else. And in fact, possibly God created the world purposefully so, that there are men and there are women, and there are blacks and there are whites, and there are Jews and there are non-Jews, and there are lots of different ethnicities and roles and divisions between in the world. We're not looking to erode those. Think of New York or America as called the melting pot of the world. It's not the melting pot of the world because everybody comes in there and becomes exactly the same. It's the melting pot of the world because everybody is able to come there and be themselves in harmony. A beautiful picture is not when you bring many colors together and then turn them all into the same color, and that's a beautiful picture. It is a beautiful picture because there are lots of different colors in it, and each color can be its color. This can be orange, and this is white, and this is blue, and this is green, and all together they make a beautiful kaleidoscope of color. Beautiful music is not beautiful because it has one instrument and then all the other instruments just conform to that instrument and everything is exactly the same, or all the voices sing the same thing. Beautiful music is when you have many distinct voices, many distinct instruments, and they harmonize together. And that is an important message that we continue to show the world, as we have, says Cecil Roth, for years, since Avraham Avinu, that we do not have to be the same as the whole world, and nobody else needs to be the same. We can stand for something and be accepted for standing for something. We don't have to just make other people feel good, and that's how that's how we are accepted. We can be accepted for actually standing for something and standing for it strongly. And this is a three-pronged argument that we're making for why it's so beyond the point that we made a stronger argument for why a blending in doesn't work. An open identity is extremely important as we go forward. A proud identity, being proud of who we are as Jews. And this is what Esther understood intuitively. Not sure where we're holding here. I constantly lose track of how the reading is going. I always try to do it in order of the screens, but somehow the order mixes up on me. So Ron, if you can, please, text 15, the Rebbe explains about how Esther solved this issue just by disclosing her identity to Achashverosh. Text 15, page 70.
All that Esther had to do was to prove that the conclusion presented by Haman following his arguments against the Jews, namely, that it is not in the king's interest to let them remain, was false. She told the king, "It is true that this nation is, as Haman stated, a people scattered and separated among the nations. It is also true that their laws differ from all peoples. Nevertheless, despite this, she told King Ahasuerus, you can see for yourself that Haman's conclusion that it is not in the king's interest to let them remain is not true. To the contrary, you can see that the uniqueness of the Jewish people is actually a positive quality. This response is succinctly captured in the words Esther spoke to Ahasuerus. May my life be given in me a petition and my people in my request. To Haman's claim that letting the Jews live was against the king's interests, Esther responded, you should realize that this is the nation from which I, Esther, emerged. It is my nation, the people that produced me, that raised and educated me, and I conduct myself in its ways. You know well that you selected me from all the finest ladies who were themselves selected from the 127 countries of your empire. If so, you have in front of you evidence that the entire complaint is without basis. Complaint is without basis. Ahasuerus agreed. He was familiar with Esther's superior qualities and exemplary behavior. When he learned from her that her conduct was reflective of the conduct of the Jewish people, my people, he was left with one question. Who in their right mind would seek to destroy a people that produces individuals as good as Esther? It could only be an evil and dangerous person.
And this, the reason why this is such a powerful statement is because this is probably the part of Esther's stance that's most relatable to us. Esther tells the king, may my life be given in my petition and my people in my request. That word, my people, recognizing and saying that it's specifically my people that is responsible for my superior quality, that all of a sudden took the whole thing and turned it on its head. Why? Because what Esther is telling the king is, and thank you, Ron, for reading so beautifully for us, is that, oh, we're a different nation. I'm not starting to get involved with that. We are different than everyone else. Not starting to get involved with that. Here's one thing I just want to point out to you. You know how you love me as a human being, as a person? That is me with my Jewish identity. You love a Jew. You love someone who is Jewish, and you love someone because of their identity. And that is most relatable because it often comes up to us in the workplace or in Ralph's or wherever or with friends that are not Jewish, etc. And if there's one thing you take away from this whole course, this can be a very powerful one. Very often, and he at least mentioned someone using the term Jew me down or whatever it is, right? In front of her and her saying that I am Jewish. It's important that when we talk about that, we explain to people and we make them recognize that I am not a good, you like me, I'm a good person, you're happy to be friends with me. That's not despite my being Jewish. That is because I am Jewish. Sure, we should walk around, we should be good people, but we should be good people and openly Jewish and link our goodness to our identity. Show people, you know why I managed to work properly for 6 days a week? Because one day a week, my religion tells me, my tradition tells me that I should rest one day a week and focus about what it is. Because I believe in God, that's why I'm honest. Because I study the Torah, that's why I'm wise. Whatever it is, link your goodness to your identity. Let them see that you are good because you are Jewish. That they are actually friends with you because you are Jewish. And that's actually what made the difference. There are so many modern day examples of this. Before we read text 16, which is one that the Jewish Learning Institute put inside the textbook for us to read about this, let me share Frank Mink's story. We had Frank Mink on our stage here at Chabad of Pasadena, and the same stage on which I'm going to teach 35 more people to 40 people, whoever it is that shows up tonight for Outsmarting Antisemitism. And he shared with us that he was in one gang and another gang and anti-Semitic trope after anti-Semitic trope, etc. What turned the whole thing around? Do you know what turned the whole thing around? When one day, as crazy as it may seem, he ended up working for a Jew. And he was hesitant, and the Jew was hesitant because the Jew knew that he was an anti-Semite, and he knew that the Jew was a Jew, etc. And then that Jew, all that Jew needed to do was be a good person, to pay him on time and to pay him and appreciate his work and to tell him how much he appreciated him as an employee. And to one day, when he found out that he was planning to walk home, to drive him home into an unsafe neighborhood and drop him off at his doorstep, etc. And when he was sure that he was going to fire him because he had dropped a marble countertop, etc., without getting into all the details of Frank Mink's story. You can read it online if you'd like. And you know what? I actually will. I'll send out a link in the Pasadena Star News. I wrote an op-ed, I remember, linked to the Frank Mink story about this. So you can probably see the gist of his story there. That's ultimately what changed his mind. Not somebody telling him, you know how ridiculous it is to believe that the Jews caused 9/11? Not somebody telling him, oh, Jews, actually, they're not so as wealthy as everybody else. Some Jews are wealthy and some Jews are not, just like any other class. It wasn't a conversation about facts. It was just one Jew making what we call in Hebrew a Kiddush Hashem, being an honest and upright and moral and upstanding Jew, and linking that and recognizing, showing him that this is linked and recognized specifically because of his Jewishness. Not, oh, this is a Jew that I know and he's moral or he's not selfish despite his Jewishness. No, he's moral and he's not selfish and he's upright and he's upstanding because he is Jewish, because of his purpose that he has in life. Text 16 is another example of this. So this is a man by the name of Muhammad Dajani. And he was born in 1946 in Jerusalem. And he spent years as a committed anti-Semite, was a senior Fatah operative, etc. And in 2014, this same man, as a professor in Quds University, led a trip of Palestinian students to Auschwitz. He was eventually fired for this crime of whatever. But anyways, what triggered this change, this turnaround? In a 2019 interview, he explained. Shayna, can you read for us, please? Text 16, page 72.
What makes a difference? I started going with my father to Hadassah in Kerem Hospital for his chemotherapy. And to my shock, I started to observe that the doctors and the nurses treated him as a patient. The doctors were very friendly, and the nurses were also. He would bring them fruit, flowers, and chocolate. And I noticed in the hospital that Palestinians are also receiving treatment. That actually awakened me to a great extent to the humanity in the other, and it also awakened my humanity. This was the starting point.
And from then, he literally turned his life around, and the hatred disappeared and was replaced with a love. And that's a very powerful story. And these stories never happen on debate stages in universities where somebody's trying to explain to someone else why this is anti-Semitic or what's wrong with anti-Semitism, etc. They always happen with human stories of one human being showing another human being that I am a good person and I am Jewish. I am a good person because I am Jewish. And that's one very, very big idea that there is to debunking anti-Semitism. Looking inward. I'm sorry, looking outward, not looking inward. Recognizing that it's the anti-Semite's problem that he's an anti-Semite, and that his problem is that he has a ditch complex, that he has a void inside of him. When he looks at us, all he sees is someone who makes him feel terrible about who he is. And if we can, instead of that, show them the beauty of it, then that can turn the entire thing around. And that leads us to the second, I'm sorry, Shane, I'll take questions right after the class is over. We just have 4 minutes left. That leads us to the second very big idea that the ditch complex enlightens for us. If you think about it, this explanation essentially is positing that Jew hatred is an evil corruption of something positive. It's something that essentially is a good thing. The person is looking at you feeling empty because you stand for something and they don't stand for anything, so therefore they want to kill you, right? It's just a corruption of a positive feeling. You can see why God created the world that way, that someone should look at somebody else, see something positive about them, and feel bad about themselves. It's just about how they choose to channel it. The amazing thing is that means that anti-Semitism is actually a symptom of something very positive that's going on in this world, and something that's very redeemable at its source. Because even though it is evil in its current form, it is really good. It is, in fact, a person that is thirsty, a person that feels that they are missing something. Now, I'm not saying it's ever going to disappear. In fact, I'm saying it likely will not disappear until the coming of Mashiach. But when Mashiach comes, then it will actually be revealed for what it truly is. Text 17 is a description of that by Maimonides. Heidi, can you read for us, please?
Okay.
Text 17, page 73.
Want me to read in Hebrew?
No, in English, please.
No, I'm kidding. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the youngest goat. Isaiah 11:6. These words are a metaphor and a parable. The interpretation of the prophecy is that the Jews will dwell at peace together with the wicked Gentiles, who, like a wolf and leopard, had sought to devour them.
Now, we're certainly not there yet, but there will come a time when the wolf would lie with the lamb, when the void that anti-Semites feel, that the non-Jews that are not learning from the Jews that are behaving upright and according to the Torah, etc., are not learning from them, right? Not the ones that are learning from them. The ones that are not learning from them will fill that void and will inspire others towards divine purpose. That will happen with the coming of Mashiach. May it be speedily in our days. Amen.
No apologies.
Hold on. I started playing it, but let me please turn your attention to the video screens for a brief summary of this afternoon's lesson. Hold on. Now we got to press play again. Up. What did we do? No.
Lesson 2.
There we go.
No apologies. 1. The absurd and contradictory claims of anti-Semites have persisted for millennia. Attempting to refute these conspiracy theories may keep some people away from anti-Semitism, but it has proven to be a futile endeavor against hardcore haters. 2. The term anti-Semitism sounds more like a theory and fails to convey that this phenomenon is actually evil wickedness. 3. Much has been said about the root cause of anti-Semitism. One approach sees it resulting from an inner void due to the lack of a true sense of purpose in life. The Jew represents a commitment to living for a higher purpose and dedication to the mission given to humanity by the world's creator. Anti-Semites wish to obliterate their inner emptiness that they are reminded of when encountering the Jew. 4. Hatred exists in the mind of the hater, not the hated. We must avoid internalizing anti-Semitism and imagining that changing elements of our Jewish heritage will solve anti-Semitism. 5. Jews and other minorities cannot be expected to be bifurcated people, severing themselves from their identities in the public sphere. For a minority to have rights in a given place means that it can have a public presence. Being open about our Jewish identity benefits Jews and other minorities. 6. For some potential haters, the best antidote against stumbling into anti-Semitic views is knowing Jews who are upright and of noble character, and noticing that this goodness is linked to their Jewish identity, upbringing, and way of life. To have this influence, we must be open about our Jewish identity. 7. A Jewish explanation for anti-Semitism must allow for the possibility of change, because the Jewish prophets insisted in God's name that anti-Semitism will eventually cease altogether. 8. We can reduce anti-Semitism by teaching the world to avoid an inner void, by embracing God's mission for all humanity.
Please join us next week for Lesson 3, The Promised Land, when we will attempt to address anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and the crossroads between the two of them. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.